In 1971, a quiet town in rural West Virginia hid a secret so disturbing that when it finally came to light, it shook the nation to its core. Behind the weathered walls of an old, isolated farmhouse lived the Whitaker family, a group of individuals whose existence defied logic, law, and humanity itself. When social workers and journalists first stepped onto that dirt road and looked into their eyes, what they found was beyond comprehension. A chilling mix of silence, deformity, and mystery that would forever stain American history. This is not just a story about a family. It's a haunting tale about what happens when isolation, neglect, and generations of secrecy breed something the world was never meant to see. This is the Whitaker Family Case. It was early spring of 1971 when a social worker named Ellen Mayfield received a series of unusual reports from the remote outskirts of odd West Virginia, a place so small, so forgotten that even most locals couldn't find it on a map. The letters were anonymous, scribbled handwriting, no return address. Each note spoke of a strange family living deep in the woods, a family that shouldn't exist. One letter read, "They don't talk right, they don't look right, they scream at night, someone needs to come see." Ellen, who had worked for Child Protective Services for over a decade, had seen everything from neglect to outright abuse, but there was something about these letters that chilled her. The tone wasn't angry or accusatory, it was fearful. So one gray morning, she packed her notepad, camera, and a box of basic supplies into her car and began the long, winding drive into the Appalachian Hills. The further she went, the narrower the roads became, until they were nothing more than gravel paths bordered by thick forests and silence so heavy it seemed alive. After 2 hours, she reached a clearing. There it was, the Whitaker home. The house looked like time itself had abandoned it. Its roof sagged inward, boards hung loose, and broken windows were patched with cardboard and plastic. A few chickens wandered near the porch, and an old rusted car sat half buried in weeds. But what truly unsettled Ellen wasn't the house. It was the feeling. A strange, oppressive quiet hung over the place, as though nature itself didn't want to be there. She stepped out, clutching her notepad. "Hello," she called out softly. No response. Just the distant sound of a dog barking somewhere behind the house. After a few moments, a figure appeared on the porch. A man, or at least what looked like one. He was barefoot, his clothes torn and stained, and his eyes darted around like a frightened child's. His mouth hung open, and when he tried to speak, all that came out was a guttural sound, more animal than human. Ellen froze. Then, another figure appeared. A woman older, her face sunken, but oddly calm. She motioned for Ellen to come closer. Hesitant, but determined, Ellen stepped onto the creaking porch. "I'm with social services," she said gently. "I just want to check in on everyone here." The woman didn't respond. She simply stared, then pointed toward the door, gesturing for Ellen to enter. Inside, the air was thick, damp, musty, filled with the odor of decay and old smoke. The living room was cluttered with broken furniture, piles of clothes, and a few dirty dishes on the floor. But there were people, at least 5 of them, all sitting or crouched around. Some rocked back and forth, others stared blankly. None spoke. Ellen looked around. her heart sinking. She recognized the signs of severe developmental disability, but there was something else. Something stranger. Their features didn't align. Some had oddly shaped skulls, wide-set eyes, twisted jaws, and yet they all looked eerily similar to one another. "Where are the parents?" Ellen asked softly. The older woman pointed upstairs. Ellen's boots creaked on the steps as she climbed. At the top, she found 2 rooms, one empty, the other occupied. A frail old man lay on a bed, barely conscious. Beside him, a younger woman rocked a baby wrapped in a dirty blanket. The old man stirred and looked at Ellen. His eyes were cloudy, unfocused, but when he spoke, his voice came out gravelly and weak. "Don't take 'em," he muttered. "They're mine." Ellen stepped closer. "Sir, I'm here to help. Can you tell me your name?" He blinked, breathing hard. "Whitaker. Amos Whitaker." That name matched one of the letters she'd received. "Are these your children?" she asked. The man nodded slowly. Then his gaze drifted toward the young woman beside him, and Ellen's stomach dropped. The way they looked at each other wasn't just familial. The silence that followed was unbearable. That was the first time she understood what the letters had meant. This was a family born not just of blood, but of repeated inbreeding across generations. Ellen left the house that day shaken to her core. She immediately filed a report, requesting medical evaluations and state intervention. But before authorities could act, the local sheriff warned her quietly, "You don't want to stir that nest, Miss Mayfield. Those people have been up there for decades. Best to leave 'em alone." But she couldn't. Something about that baby haunted her. Its tiny face had the same distortions, the same haunting resemblance to everyone in that house. Over the next few weeks, Ellen returned several times, bringing food, clothes, and trying to communicate. She slowly learned the names: Betty, Ray, Lorraine, and Timmy. Each seemed mentally impaired to varying degrees, and none could speak full sentences. Their only sounds were grunts, yelps, or strange high-pitched noises. She also began to notice that villagers in the nearby town treated the Whitakers like ghosts. They whispered about them in the grocery store, crossed the street when a family member appeared in town, and some even left food at the edge of the woods without saying a word. One old man finally told Ellen the truth. "Them Whitakers been living up there since before my granddaddy's time," he said. "Cousins marrying cousins. Ain't no one dared stop it. They don't want outsiders meddling." The old man's face hardened. "Last time someone went snooping, they came back white as death. Said them folks don't take kindly to questions." Despite the warnings, Ellen persisted. She began documenting everything: photos, interviews, notes. She wanted to get those children medical help, maybe even relocate them. But when she returned one summer afternoon, the house was empty. Every door swung open, furniture overturned, belongings scattered. It looked like the family had fled or been moved. The chickens were gone. The car was gone. Only the baby's blanket remained on the porch, covered in dirt and dried mud. Ellen filed one last report, but it vanished in bureaucracy. Within months, she was reassigned to another district. The Whitaker case was closed, or so everyone thought. 2 decades later, in the early 1990s, a filmmaker named Mark Little stumbled across a forgotten folder in a dusty West Virginia courthouse archive. Inside were yellowed photographs, social service notes, and a name he didn't recognize. The Whitaker Family Case, 1971. The pictures were unsettling. Faces blurred by time and flash glare, yet unmistakably strange. Mark was a documentary filmmaker who specialized in obscure American folklore, and something about those images caught his curiosity. He had read about Appalachian isolation, moonshine towns, and vanishing communities, but never anything quite like this. So, in the summer of 1993, Mark packed his camera gear, hired a local guide, and drove deep into the same hills where Ellen Mayfield had once stood in horror. The locals still didn't talk much. When Mark asked about the Whitakers at a gas station, the cashier froze mid-transaction. "You don't want to go messing with that family," he muttered. "Ain't right. What happened up there? Some things best left buried." But Mark wasn't easily deterred. He followed an old property map until the dirt roads gave way to weeds and silence. And then, as though time had paused for 20 years, there it was again, the same house, still standing, sagging deeper into the earth. He approached cautiously. The windows were boarded now, the door half open. It was clear someone still lived there. He called out, "Hello, I'm a filmmaker. I just want to talk." No answer, only the sound of a distant dog barking. Then, a man emerged from behind the house. He was barefoot, wearing a filthy shirt and jeans that hung off his frame. His face, Mark would later say, was unlike anything he'd ever seen. The man didn't speak, only pointed toward the ground and made a series of guttural noises. Mark lowered his camera. "Are you Ray?" he asked, recalling the name from Ellen's notes. The man didn't reply, just stared with wide, unblinking eyes, and then, to Mark's shock, began barking. Like a dog, loud, desperate barks that echoed through the trees. Moments later, two more figures appeared. A woman and a young man, both disheveled, their movements twitchy and strange. Mark's guide took a step back, whispering, "We shouldn't be here." But Mark, fascinated and horrified, kept filming. The footage he captured that day would later go viral, decades later. Though it was never meant for entertainment, it was meant as evidence of something hauntingly real. As the days went on, Mark returned several times, bringing food and supplies. The family began to trust him, or at least tolerate him. Through local records and whispered stories, he pieced together the tragic truth Ellen had only glimpsed. The Whitakers had lived in that region since the early 1900s. Their ancestors were two brothers, Henry and Jacob Whitaker, who had married two sisters from a nearby hollow. Over generations, the family became increasingly isolated. Poverty, pride, and superstition kept them from leaving, and outsiders stopped visiting. By the 1950s, the Whitakers were intermarrying. Cousins, nieces, even siblings. Children born from these unions often had severe deformities and cognitive disabilities. But in their world, it wasn't seen as wrong. It was simply the way things were. Then came the birth that shocked 1971 America. Ellen Mayfield had never written it publicly, but in her final confidential report, she mentioned something extraordinary and terrible. The infant she saw that day wasn't a product of ordinary inbreeding. It was the child of a brother and sister, born in total secrecy and hidden from authorities. Local midwives refused to deliver it. Rumor had it that the baby had survived only a few months before being buried near the old shed behind the house. But when Mark and his guide searched that area, they found something chilling. Half buried in the dirt was a small, rusted tin box. Inside were a baby's rattle, a piece of cloth, and a faded note in shaky handwriting. Born wrong, God forgive me, 1971. The handwriting matched one of Ellen's case files, Amos Whitaker's signature. That discovery confirmed the unthinkable. The Whitakers had continued their bloodline long after outsiders thought the case was closed. The 1971 birth was real. A child born from two direct siblings hidden away and erased from local memory through silence and shame. When Mark released parts of his findings to the press, the reaction was immediate. Some accused him of exploiting tragedy. Others argued he was exposing a dark truth about forgotten America. The place is so isolated that civilization had simply stopped reaching them. The authorities reopened the case briefly in 1994. Medical teams visited the family, offering care and relocation, but the Whitakers refused to leave. They didn't understand the world outside, didn't want to. They were, as one doctor put it, the product of an ecosystem of isolation. Mark continued documenting for years, returning every few seasons. He grew fond of them, calling them by name, bringing clothes, food, and sometimes gifts. He said that despite everything, the grunts, the barking, the deformities, there was kindness. They were not monsters. They were victims. But one question continued to haunt him. What happened to the baby from 1971? In 2004, while cleaning out an old shed behind the property, Mark made his final and most disturbing discovery. Hidden beneath a pile of rotted wood was a small grave, marked only with a crooked wooden cross. He never exhumed it, but when he placed his camera down and whispered, "I'm sorry," the air around him felt heavy, like the earth itself remembered. Years later, genetic experts would confirm through voluntary testing of surviving Whitaker members that the family had indeed experienced multiple generations of close relative reproduction, resulting in severe genetic mutations. Their physical and cognitive differences weren't acts of horror. They were the results of neglect, ignorance, and isolation passed down for a century. The story drew national attention. News outlets called it the most inbred family in America. But behind the sensationalism, there was a deeper tragedy. A community so forgotten that no one intervened until it was too late. Ellen Mayfield, the social worker who first reported the case, passed away in 1989. In her private diary, found years later by her niece, she wrote, "They weren't evil, they were lost. Lost to time, to place, to silence. I sometimes wonder if God himself turned his eyes away from those hills." The Whitakers still live in West Virginia today. Or at least, some of them do. They remain on private property, protected by distant relatives, and cared for by a few who truly understand their story. They don't seek attention, and those who have visited since often describe a strange mix of sadness and peace around the place, as if the land finally decided to forgive them. What began as a horrifying secret in 1971 ended as one of America's most haunting reminders of what happens when humanity forgets its own. Isolation can deform more than bodies. It can twist generations. The Whitaker case isn't just a story of inbreeding, it's a story of abandonment, ignorance, and the human need for connection that was never given. Today, their name lives on in documentaries, podcasts, and urban legends, but the truth remains darker and sadder than fiction. Behind every distorted face was once a child who could have lived differently, if only someone had reached them sooner. And maybe that's why, whenever visitors pass through those woods, they still say you can hear faint barking echoes at dusk, not of dogs, but of the last Whitakers, calling out in a language the world forgot how to understand. If you found this story haunting, remember, real horror doesn't always come from monsters or ghosts. Sometimes it's born from silence, from neglect, from the places we choose not to see. If this story moved you, please subscribe, share, and help keep forgotten stories like this alive. Your support helps uncover more untold pieces of history, one truth at a time.